The sun was high over Whispering Pines when they rode off. For kids, laughing, carefree, and never seen again. It was July 8th, 1989. The daytime froze for a quiet town that never fully healed. Bikes were found at the edge of the woods. No struggle, no blood, no answers. For 35 years, the case sat cold, until a city crew unearthed a tunnel beneath Main Street in 2024, sealed tight with rusted chains and a child's bracelet embedded in the dirt. What lies beneath Whispering Pines isn't just history. It's a buried truth clawing to be heard. Whispering Pines, Oregon, June 3rd, 2024. The jackhammer thudded rhythmically against the pavement. Dust swirled in the late morning heat as the construction crew chipped away at the cracked sidewalk just off Main Street. At first, it was just another job, another noisy nuisance in a dying town that had grown too used to silence. Then the ground groaned. Not a tremor, not a shift, a sound, low, hollow, like breath exhaling from beneath the soil. Mason Reed, 36, city infrastructure inspector, leaned forward and squinted. He was tall, always a little disheveled, always tired-looking. Grief sat behind his eyes like an old roommate who never moved out. "Stop the hammer," he said, motioning sharply. The crewman looked confused but obeyed. The quiet that followed was sudden, eerie. The street seemed to hum. "What is that?" the foreman asked. Mason stepped onto the broken concrete and crouched down. There, beneath the fractured layer, was a hole. Not a pipe, not a crawl space. An opening carved into something that looked ancient. The dirt inside had a strange, compacted look, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. And then something glinted in the rubble. He reached in carefully, brushing away pebbles and dust. His fingers closed around something cold. A bracelet, tiny, child-sized, woven string, frayed by time, threaded through with glass beads and a tarnished silver heart. A letter was etched faintly into the heart's surface. K. Mason's breath caught. His fingers trembled slightly. The foreman leaned closer, frowning. "Looks like a kid's bracelet," he muttered. Mason stood, the heat pressing around him, but his skin had gone cold. He remembered that bracelet. July 1989, Whispering Pines. He'd been one of the last people to see them. Cara Delaney, 12 years old. The girl who used to chase fireflies in his backyard when they were kids. Cara with her missing tooth smile and always too loud laugh. She wore that bracelet every day. They called them the Pine Street Four after they vanished. Cara, Dylan, twins Grace and Matthew. Gone. One summer afternoon. Just like this. They'd taken off on their bikes toward the edge of the woods. They never came back. No bodies. No signs of foul play. Just the bikes. Abandoned neatly in a row. And Cara's bracelet. He remembered the posters stapled to every tree. The candlelight vigils. The whispers behind closed doors. His own mother crying when she thought he couldn't hear. He'd been 11. And he remembered something he never told anyone. Present day, Whispering Pines Historical Society archive room. 2 hours later, Mason sat alone at a table in the dim archive room downtown. Files lay spread before him. Photocopies of witness statements, yellowed newspaper clippings, a police sketch of the last known sighting. He couldn't stop staring at the photograph of the 4 kids lined up in front of Cara's house, all of them laughing. Innocent. Gone. The bracelet sat before him in a sealed evidence bag. He picked up his phone. "Hey," he said quietly when his sister answered. "You remember Cara's bracelet?" There was a pause. "Mason, why are you asking me that?" "I think I just found it. They were digging under Main and—" He stopped. Something moved in the corner of the archive room. A soft shuffle. He turned sharply, heart pounding. Nothing. Just rows of filing cabinets, cold metal catching the light. "Listen, I think." He began again, but the call dropped. His phone screen froze. The battery icon blinked red, then blacked out completely. Static filled the air. The bracelet in the bag vibrated. Just slightly, but unmistakably. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. The town was too quiet. He stood by his kitchen window with the lights off, staring down the darkened street. The bracelet was on the table, wrapped again in cloth, but he could feel it. like it was watching. The news hadn't reached anyone yet. He hadn't told the city council. Not yet. He needed more. So the next morning, he went back. He walked past the foreman, ignored the crew, and slipped through the fencing into the exposed cavity under the street. It wasn't just a hole. It was an entrance. A tunnel, narrow, lined with crumbling brick and old railroad wood, sloping down. No city records mentioned it, not even in the historical dig logs. He turned on his flashlight and stepped inside. The air changed instantly. Thick, cold, metallic. The light flickered. The ground creaked. He kept walking. Something scraped along the wall. Faint etchings. Names. Carved into stone. Kara, Dylan, Grace, Matt. His chest tightened. There was something else. Farther in. A door. Wooden. Old. And nailed shut. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the rusted nails driven deep into the frame. As he reached for the handle, something behind the door knocked. Once, then twice. Then it stopped. His breath fogged the air, and from behind the sealed door came the sound of a bicycle bell ringing. Whispering Pines, June 4th, 2024. Mason didn't sleep that night, but not from fear. Not entirely. It was a sound. That bicycle bell. Soft, distant, childlike, echoing from behind a nailed-shut door 30 feet below Main Street. A sound that hadn't been heard in this town in 35 years. By sunrise, Mason sat in his truck, parked near the construction site. A thermos of coffee sat untouched in the cup holder. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel, nerves frayed, thoughts spiraling. He wasn't supposed to be involved. His job was paperwork, inspections, permits, not unsealing ghosts buried in concrete. But there was no mistaking it. That bracelet had once belonged to Kara Delaney, and that tunnel, that door, was never in any town records. Someone had built it, someone had buried it, and someone wanted it forgotten. But the sound of that bell was still ringing in his ears. He grabbed his phone and dialed. "Ruth," he said as soon as she picked up. "You still have that box?" The one Dad kept after the case was closed. There was a long pause. "Why are you asking about the kids?" Ruth's voice was softer now. She'd always had a gentler nature, the kind that breaks slowly over time. "I found something. Something that might be part of it. You still have the file or not?" "You need to let it go, Mason." "I can't." "Because of Kara?" He didn't answer. The silence said enough. 1989, the day before the disappearance. The four of them were inseparable. Kara, the loud one. Dylan, the quiet observer. The twins, Grace and Matthew, always finishing each other's sentences. They lived on the same block, rode the same beat-up bikes, built forts in the woods, and dared each other to race through Old Quarry Road blindfolded. And they had a secret. Mason never knew what it was. He was younger, not part of their circle. But that summer, something had changed. The four had grown more distant, whispering among themselves, sneaking out late. They were fixated on something. A place. He remembered Kara's voice that final day. "We're going to prove it's real. And when we do, no one in this stupid town will forget us again." But they vanished, and everyone forgot, or pretended to. Present day, Whispering Pines Library. Ruth met Mason at the back of the local library, a manila envelope in her hands. Her gray eyes were wary. "This wasn't Dad's official file," she whispered, sliding it across the table. He kept notes, things he couldn't put in reports. Their father, Detective Henry Reed, was one of the lead investigators on the Pine Street 4 case. After the investigation turned cold, he never recovered, drank too much, died in 1997 of a stroke, alone in his study. Mason opened the envelope. Inside were faded photos, old maps, sketches. One caught his attention immediately, a hand-drawn diagram of something beneath the town. Tunnel's branches. A date written in the corner, 1913. What the hell is this? Dad found blueprints no one wanted him to see. Said there were old mine shafts, prohibition tunnels, even one leading to the church basement. But none of them were on any official town plan. Mason flipped the page. A handwritten note was scribbled in the margin. Entrance sealed under Main. Do not open. Something's still there. He leaned back. The bracelet was found in that tunnel roof. She stared at him. Kara's. He nodded. Ruth's fingers trembled slightly. She looked around, leaned in. There's something else. A woman came to the house last week. Said she used to live here. Asked me about the lost ones. Did she give a name? Ruth shook her head, but she said something strange. She said they didn't leave, they were taken, and they're still waiting for someone to hear them. Later that night, church records basement. The map in his father's notes pointed toward the old St. Gideon's Church, just outside downtown. The pastor had passed in 2006. The place was now condemned, sealed off, but Mason knew a way in. The side door creaked open after some elbow grease. Dust motes floated in shafts of pale moonlight filtering through cracked stained glass. The basement stairs groaned under his weight. He found a locked cabinet in the rear corner, file drawers labeled by year. He forced open 1989. Inside, baptism records, sermon notes, and something strange. A thin, unmarked black notebook. The first entry read, "They came in through the tunnel again. Children this time. 4 of them. Don't know how they found it, but the gate still held." Mason's breath caught. He turned the page. Kara wears the bracelet. I see her in the walls sometimes, but she doesn't see me. His pulse quickened. He flipped faster. The door under Maine must never open. It was locked for a reason. If they hear the bell, they'll come back. And if they come back, we're not ready. Then, nothing. The rest of the pages were blank. The bell, the door, they weren't just metaphors. They were real, and someone, maybe many, had worked to keep them closed. June 6 to 2:12 a.m. Mason sat at his dining table. Everything spread before him. The bracelet, his father's notes, the church journal. His mind spun. He didn't believe in ghosts. Not really, but he believed in tunnels, in hidden doors, and in the weight of guilt that never quite let go. He still remembered the last thing Kara said to him, the day before she vanished. She'd handed him a folded note, then rode off before he could open it. He still had that note, tucked inside a box, untouched for 35 years. He opened it now. "If we don't come back, it's because we found it. You'll hear the bell. Don't follow." But Mason had heard it, and now he was following. That same night, construction tunnel site. He snuck past the fencing again, this time with tools. A crowbar, gloves, a flashlight. The tunnel hadn't changed. The air still hung cold and stale. He reached the door again, knocked once. Nothing. Then twice. Silence. He slipped the crowbar into the edge of the wood and pushed. The nails groaned, then snapped loose one by one. The door trembled as he pulled, and then it opened. The tunnel beyond stretched downward, lined with stone and carved arches, far older than anything in the town. He stepped inside. Behind him, the door slammed shut, and from the darkness ahead, a child's voice whispered, "You came." Whispering Pines, June 7th, 2024, 1:18 a.m. Mason didn't remember falling. Only the sensation, a tilt in gravity, a sharp pull downward, and a moment of utter silence before impact. He woke up in darkness. The flashlight had shattered, its glass strewn across the stone floor. Only the weak red flicker from his phone's emergency light illuminated the tunnel walls around him. He sat up slowly, groaning. His left ankle throbbed, not broken but twisted. And then he remembered. The door slamming shut. The child's voice. And now this place. Colder. Older. Like the earth itself had turned its back on sunlight and memory. He stood, limping slightly, and scanned the walls. Symbols. Faded carvings etched into stone. Spirals. Eyes. A sun with slashes through it. He reached out to touch one and felt a warmth, faint but pulsing, as if the wall were alive. Farther down, the tunnel forked. The left passage sloped downward, slick with moisture. The right held dry, cracked dirt, and what looked like shoe prints. Small ones. Children's. He followed them. 1989, 2 days before the disappearance. Inside Cara Delaney's diary, hidden under floorboards, was a single page no one had ever read. There's something under the town. Dylan heard it first, voices in the pipes. Late at night, Grace and Matt followed the echo and found the old opening behind the post office. We think it was built during Prohibition, but it goes deeper. It's like something was buried, alive. We're going back tomorrow. We think we're close. Present day tunnel system beneath Whispering Pines. The path twisted for what felt like hours. Mason passed remnants of what may once have been rooms, alcoves with collapsed wooden beds, shelves etched into the stone. He paused near one that still held a single decaying leather shoe, a child's shoe. Then he saw it, light ahead. He stepped forward cautiously. A wide circular chamber opened before him, lit faintly by bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls and ceiling, and at its center stood a rusted merry-go-round. Old, cracked, painted horses frozen in motion, chains dangling loosely. Mason's breath hitched, because he recognized it. It had stood in Whispering Pines town's square playground in the 1980s, removed after the kids disappeared. People said it was too old, too broken, but it hadn't been destroyed. It had been moved. Down here. Why? He stepped closer and spotted something carved into the central pole. Names. 4 of them. Deep, violent. Cara, Dylan, Grace, Matt. His fingers traced the letters. Then the merry-go-round began to turn. Slowly. Without wind. Without force. A giggle echoed behind him. He spun, heart-hammering. No one. But another sound came next, metal squealing. A bicycle wheel turning. He stumbled backward, breath caught in his throat, eyes darting. Then he saw her, just beyond the edge of the chamber. A girl, shoulder-length hair, dirt-smudged face, a torn dress, maybe 11 or 12. She stood perfectly still, her eyes wide and staring. Mason's voice cracked. Cara? She tilted her head, didn't smile, just lifted one hand and pointed deeper into the tunnel behind her. Then, slowly, she walked backward into the dark, never breaking eye contact. The tunnel swallowed her whole. Elsewhere, Whispering Pines archives. Ruth Reed couldn't sleep. Something about Mason's voice on the phone had unsettled her. She kept replaying it. The way he said, I heard the bell. She sat alone in the archive room with her father's files. She flipped through a yellowed envelope marked Unsanctioned Interviews. One caught her attention. A typed transcript dated August 1st, 1989, 3 weeks after the kids vanished. Interview with Evelyn Gant, 87 years old, former caretaker at the Whispering Pines Sanatorium, closed in 1956. Evelyn, it's under the town. It was always under the town. They built on it anyway. Officer, what do you mean it? Evelyn, it doesn't like the noise, the laughter. It sleeps when the town forgets, but it wakes when they remember, when they go looking. Officer, are you saying the children woke something up? Evelyn, they didn't wake it. They fed it. Ruth dropped the page. She picked up the phone, but Mason didn't answer. Back underground, unknown depths. The passage grew narrower. Mason could no longer stand fully upright. His phone's battery blinked at 3%. He should have turned back. But that girl's eyes, her silence, her stillness, it wasn't a hallucination. There was something else ahead now. The tunnel widened again into a larger cavern, this one lined with drawings. Childlike, crude crayon shapes scratched directly into the rock. Stick figures, houses, trees, a bike, and then darker images. A tall shadow with many arms, red circles for eyes, and 4 smaller figures drawn inside its body. Mason stumbled backward, his foot hitting something solid. A toy, an old metal truck, rusted but unmistakably from the 80s. He turned, and there it was. A door, metal, ancient, bolted shut from this side. On it, scratched deep, were 4 handprints, child-sized. Above them, a message scrawled in chalk. We're not dead. His phone blinked off. The cavern went black. Then a new sound filled the air. for bicycle bells, ringing, overlapping, out of sync, like laughter stretched too thin. Mason backed toward the tunnel. His breathing was rapid, loud. Behind him, something began to knock on the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. A whisper slithered across the chamber. "We remember you, Mason." Whispering Pines, June 8, 2024, early morning. Mason's heart thundered in the suffocating dark. The whispering voice had named him, not just a stranger poking around, but someone they remembered. "We remember you, Mason." He slammed his palm against the cold metal door, trying to force it open. It didn't budge. His breath came in ragged gasps. Behind the door, the knocking returned, slow, deliberate, like a code. He pressed his ear against the cold steel. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. A rhythm, not random. Something ancient. Desperation swelled inside him. He fumbled for his phone, now dead. Panic clawed at his throat. How long had he been down here? The tunnel behind him seemed to close in. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. Then a voice, barely audible, childlike but with an echo of decades. "Don't trust the ones who built the town." Later that morning, Whispering Pines Police Station. Detective Sarah Ellis pored over the old case files. She was new to town, but had spent the last week tracing the Long Cold Pine Street 4 case at Mason's urging. A woman in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and pragmatic. Sarah had a cop's instinct, but nothing about this case made sense. For children disappeared without a trace. No witnesses, no bodies. And now, a tunnel under the town, sealed for decades. She pulled out a faded photograph. A group picture of the 4 kids with their bikes outside Kara's house. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A man in his 60s, lean and grizzled, stood behind her in the shadows. "I wouldn't dig too deep if I were you." Sarah spun around. "Who are you?" The man's eyes were dark pools. "Name's Roy Jensen. I was with the department back then. Saw more than I ever told anyone." He stepped forward, the weight of years pressing down. They built that tunnel for a reason, not for children, for something else. Sarah's pulse quickened. Something else. Roy's lips tightened. "You don't want to wake what's beneath Whispering Pines." Underground tunnel, midday. Mason sat against a metal door, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was worse. He ran his fingers over the carved handprints, trying to make sense of the chalk message. "We're not dead." But what did it mean? He thought of Kara's last words, the note she gave him. "If we don't come back, it's because we found it. You'll hear the bell. Don't follow." He was following, and now he was trapped. A faint draft swept through the cavern, carrying a scent, old wood, damp earth, and something like smoke. Ahead, in the distance, he thought he heard whispers. Low, overlapping, like dozens of voices layered over each other. Then footsteps, heavy, dragging, coming closer. Mason scrambled to his feet, searching the tunnel for any other exit. None. The dragging grew louder, and suddenly a shadow emerged from the darkness beyond the door. Not human. Tall, elongated limbs, face hidden in shadow, eyes glowing faint red. The thing stopped at the door. It raised a clawed hand, and the metal door groaned under invisible pressure. Mason's scream echoed to the tunnel as the door began to buckle. Whispering Pines Town Hall, afternoon. Sarah sat across from Roy Jensen in a small meeting room. His face was grim. "Why didn't you say anything all these years?" she asked. Roy stared at the faded badge on his desk. "Because the town wanted the truth buried. Those kids, they were collateral, but not the first." He pulled out an old newspaper clipping, a headline from 1913. "Sanatorium fire kills 12 children. Cause unknown." The sanatorium was built over those tunnels, and after the fire, the town covered it up. The tunnels were sealed off, the records destroyed. But the fire was an accident. Sarah frowned. What was it? Roy swallowed hard. Something alive beneath the earth. Something that feeds. Back in the tunnel, late afternoon. Mason's flashlight flickered to life again. Somehow his phone had rebooted with 1% battery. He used a faint glow to edge toward the shadow. The creature was gone, but the air remained thick. His fingers brushed something cold and metallic on the floor. A bicycle bell. He picked it up and felt it vibrate, not mechanically, but like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the whisper returned. You heard the bell. Now you belong. Mason's vision blurred. The walls seemed to pulse, and the tunnel closed in around him. Whispering Pines, June 9, 2024. The morning light seeped weakly through the stained glass of St. Gideon's Church as Mason's mind swirled with fragments of the tunnel. The creature, the bells pulsed like a heartbeat beneath his skin. He woke stiff, the weight of the night pressing on his chest like a silent accusation. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Ellis. Roy wants to meet. You need to see this. He had no choice but to go. Town Hall meeting room. Roy Jensen was already waiting when Mason arrived, the creases on his face carved deeper with exhaustion. Roy slid a worn folder across the table. Inside were photographs from a hidden evidence locker, black and white images of tunnels, vast, sprawling, riddled beneath the town. In one, a child's skeletal hand lay, clutching a twisted piece of metal, a broken bicycle bell. Roy's voice was low, almost a whisper. These kids, they didn't just vanish. They were trapped. Mason swallowed hard, eyes flicking to a grainy photo of the four children, faces pale and sunken. Flashback, 1913. The sanatorium's flames clawed skyward as terrified screams echoed from its burning halls. The fire had been no accident. It had been a desperate attempt to seal away something buried beneath the building. The patients, the children, all trapped in a nightmare beneath the town. Back to present Sarah's office. Sarah laid down her own files, her gaze sharp and unyielding. We've been blind. The town's history isn't just stories. It's a warning. She looked at Mason. The tunnels, the door, the bell, these are part of cycle. Something feeds on forgotten. Mason nodded, heart pounding. We have to find out what. Underground tunnel. Evening. The air was thicker now, almost suffocating. Mason's footsteps echoed hollowly as he traced the walls, the whisper voices growing louder, an unintelligible chorus of pleas and warnings. He paused by a jagged crack in the stone wall, fingers trembling. Beneath the surface, something moved. Slowly, the crack widened, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. A soft light spilled out. Mason stepped through. Hidden chamber. Inside, walls were covered in scratches, drawings, and symbols. In the center, an altar made of broken bicycles, toys, and scattered bones. A circle of old photographs lay arranged carefully, a memorial. Mason's breath caught as he spotted Kara's bracelet resting atop the altar. Suddenly, a whisper floated through the chamber, closer this time. Help us. Outside, the town was quiet, but beneath, something was stirring. Whispering Pines, June 10, 2024. The morning fog clung to Whispering Pines like a shroud, muffling the quiet streets. Mason's mind churned with the altar beneath the town, the whispered plea and the weight of years pressing down on him. The bracelet's cold metal still rested in his palm, a tether to a past no one dared to face. He had no answers, only questions. Town library, later that day. Ruth sat behind a worn oak desk, sorting through a box of old town records Mason had brought her. She lifted a faded photograph, tracing a hand over the face of a woman whose eyes seemed to burn with sorrow and warning. She was a town historian, Ruth said softly. Eliza Caraway. No one talks about her anymore. Mason frowned. Why? Ruth shrugged. Because she went missing shortly after the Pine Street Four vanished. Some say she knew too much. The local diner, afternoon. Mason met Sarah and Roy in a dim corner booth. The weight of secrets and suspicion filled the space between them. Roy leaned in, voice hushed. Eliza was obsessed with those tunnels. Said they were older than the town itself, that they held a dark history. Sarah added, she left behind a journal. It's supposed to be locked away in the Historical Society. If we can find it. Mason nodded grimly. We have to. Whispering Pines Historical Society. Evening. The building was silent. shadows stretching long across the walls. Mason and Ruth moved carefully between the stacks. The scent of old paper thick in the air. In a locked glass case, a leather-bound journal rested. Mason's fingers trembled as he lifted it free. The cover was cracked and worn. Inside, Eliza's careful script told of rituals, disappearances, and a presence beneath the town that grew stronger with each passing year. One passage chilled Mason to the bone. The children did not leave. They are bound, feeding the hunger below. The tunnel's bell is a summons, a call that cannot be ignored. Late night, Mason's home. The bracelet lay on the table, but now its silver heart was warm, almost pulsing. Mason's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll join them. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. The quiet town was no longer safe. Underground tunnel, midnight. Mason stood before the old metal door once more. The air was thick with expectation. A single bicycle bell tolled in the darkness. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Beyond lay a chamber lined with faded murals. Depictions of children playing, trapped behind a cage of shadows. The whisper came again, this time clearer. Help us. Whispering Pines, June 11th, 2024, late morning. The sky was a muted gray, heavy with an impending storm as Mason sat cross-legged on the creaky wooden floor of his childhood bedroom. The worn leather journal lay open before him, its brittle pages yellowed and fragrant with age. Outside, the wind whispered softly, rattling the old windows like a warning. Mason's fingers traced the delicate script. Eliza Carraway's words painted a chilling tapestry of the town's buried secrets, one page after another. Excerpt from Eliza's journal. The tunnels beneath Whispering Pines are more than relics of forgotten time. They are a prison, a wound in the earth where darkness festers. The children, taken in 1989, did not simply disappear. They cross a threshold. They are caught between worlds, tethered to the bell that calls and the hunger that waits. The town's founding families knew. They built over the tunnels, sealed the doors, and silenced the voices. But the hunger remembers. It reaches out through the walls, through time itself. Mason's eyes lifted from the page, his breath shallow. The lines blurred as the room seemed to pulse with quiet menace. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a map, a warning, and a plea. Later that day, Ruth's house. Ruth poured them each a cup of tea, the warmth a stark contrast of the cold dread settling over the siblings. Mason shared passages aloud, his voice trembling at times. One entry here. Eliza describes a ritual meant to bind the hunger, but it required a sacrifice. Children taken from the town to feed the darkness below. Ruth shook her head. My father never mentioned anything like that. Mason clenched his jaw. He was scared enough to keep it buried. Whispering Pines Cemetery. Dusk. Drawn by an uneasy impulse, Mason and Sarah found themselves wandering through rows of moss-covered gravestones. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that danced with the wind. Near a weathered stone marked Simply Unknown, Sarah stopped. There's something carved here, she said, brushing away dirt. Beneath the faded letters was a symbol matching the ones Mason had seen in the tunnel. The spiral eye. Whose grave is this? Mason asked. Sarah shook her head. No record. The town likes to forget the forgotten. Suddenly, a rustling behind them. A figure appeared, old, hunched, eyes sharp and unreadable. Looking for the truth? The stranger rasped. Mason swallowed hard. Who are you? Call me Elias. The man said, voice like gravel. I keep the stories the town wants buried. Inside Elias' cabin, walls were lined with maps, newspaper clippings, and dozens of strange artifacts. Old keys, faded photographs, and fragments of broken bells. Elias gestured toward a dusty radio sitting in the corner. This, he said, is how I listen. Static hiss from the speakers, then a faint series of tones, almost like Morse code, echoed through the room. Mason leaned in. Is that a message? Elias nodded. From beneath, the hunger speaks in signals. He handed Mason a battered notebook filled with coded scribbles. That night, Mason's home. Alone, Mason sat at his desk decoding the signals. Patterns emerged, coordinates, dates, warnings. And then Chillingly, a name, Cara Delaney. A new message scrawled beneath it. They remember you, Mason. The hunger grows. The bracelet on his desk pulsed faintly. A storm broke outside, thunder shaking the walls. Mason's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Tonight, the bell tolls again. Underground tunnel entrance, midnight. With the storm roaring overhead, Mason, Sarah, and Ruth approached the gaping hole beneath Main Street. Lanterns casting flickering shadows on the cracked pavement. The air smelled of earth and rain. A faint bell rang. Clear, persistent, they descended into the dark, each step heavier than the last. The walls seemed to close in. Ahead, a dim light glimmered, and from the shadows, a small figure stepped forward. Cara, her eyes were hollow but burning with silent warning. Whispering Pines, June 12th, 2024, early morning. The storm from the previous night had passed, but the town remained cloaked in a damp, suffocating fog. Mason woke before dawn, the weight of last night's descent still settling in his bones. Cara's hollow eyes haunted his mind, the ghostly figure stepping from shadow into flickering light, her silent warning pressing down like a shroud. He sat at his kitchen table, rubbing his temples, the bracelet's pulse now steady and insistent against his wrist like a heartbeat synchronized with his own. He had to understand what Cara meant, what had happened beneath Whispering Pines, and what hunger still clawed in the darkness. Sarah's office, mid-morning. Sarah Ellis had spent the night poring over town records and police archives, cross-referencing missing persons and unsolved cases dating back nearly a century. The patterns were unmistakable. Every few decades, children vanished, taken or trapped, and then forgotten, as if the town conspired to erase their existence. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mason. Found something. Need to meet. Minutes later, Mason arrived with Ruth and Elias in tow. The abandoned sanatorium site. The group stood at the edge of the overgrown ruins where the Whispering Pines Sanatorium once stood. Nature had reclaimed the skeletal remains of the building, vines snaking through shattered windows, the air thick with decay and lost memories. Elias moved like a man guided by invisible threads, reaching into his coat and producing a rusty key. This opens the old cellar beneath the sanatorium, he said quietly, where the hunger first awoke. They exchanged wary looks, but followed him through a gap in the crumbling brick. The cellar. Stairs spiraled downward into oppressive darkness. The group's flashlights carved narrow beams through the stale air. At the bottom, the space opened into a cavernous room lined with damp stone walls, etched with crude symbols matching those in the tunnels. At the center lay a circular pit, sealed with a heavy iron grate covered in ancient runes. Elias traced a finger over the runes. This was a prison, a seal meant to hold back what's beneath. Mason peered down into the abyss. A faint sound drifted upward, a soft bell ringing far below. Flashback, Whispering Pines, 1913. Inside the sanatorium, chaos reigned. Children screamed as the building burned around them. Doctors and orderlies moved frantically, attempting to seal a hidden door deep below the foundation. A terrified nurse clutched a small child, whispering prayers as the walls shook. The hunger was hungry. Present day, the cellar. Mason's flashlight flickered. He saw movement at the edge of the pit, a pale hand reaching up to the iron bars, fingers curling in desperation. The group recoiled. Suddenly, a whisper echoed, layered and urgent. Help us. Free us. The hunger feeds. Sarah's voice shook. We have to close the cycle. Ruth stepped forward, holding Eliza's journal tightly. The ritual she wrote about. To bind the hunger or end it. Preparing the ritual. Back at Mason's house, they assembled the ancient items described in the journal. Candles carved from beeswax, iron keys, and fragments of broken bells arranged in a circle. Mason placed Cara's bracelet in the center. As twilight bled into night, the group gathered beneath the flickering candlelight, voices low and reverent. The air grew thick, charged. Outside, the wind howled, and the faint toll of bicycle bells echoed across the town. The ritual chamber beneath Main Street. They descended once more, the tunnel walls seeming to breathe, alive with shadow and memory. At the sealed iron grate, Elias began to chant in a language older than the town. The runes glowed faintly. A deep rumble shook the earth. The grate lifted slowly, revealing a swirling darkness below. From the depths, the hunger stirred. For ghostly figures emerged: Kara, Dylan, Grace, and Matthew, eyes glowing with sorrow and hunger. Mason reached out, heartbreaking. "We're here," he whispered. But the hunger was not satisfied. It lunged forward, a monstrous shadow twisting and shifting. The tunnel exploded with light and sound. Whispering Pines, June 13th, 2024, midnight. The air was thick with damp and dust as Mason, Sarah, Ruth, and Elias stood on the precipice between the known world and the abyss beneath Whispering Pines. The swirling darkness below the grate writhed like a living thing, pulsing with hunger that twisted the very air around them. Kara and the other children, ghostly pale, their eyes shimmering with sorrow, hovered at the edge, trapped between this world and the next. Their silent pleas echoed in Mason's mind, tearing at his resolve and filling his heart with a desperate need to save them. But the hunger was rising, ancient and terrible. It seeped through the cracks in the walls and through their veins, whispering promises of oblivion. The ritual's price. Elias's voice wavered as he chanted, the arcane language vibrating through the cavern like a storm. Ruth clutched the journal, her hand shaking as she repeated the incantation. Sarah's eyes never left the darkness, which now roiled with shapes that defied understanding. Twisting limbs, flickering faces, shadows of agony. Mason felt the bracelet warm against his skin, a tether pulling him deeper into the void. His breath came ragged. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. Suddenly, a piercing cry shattered the chant. From the depths, a monstrous form surged upward, an amorphous shadow, writhing and snarling, its many eyes blazing red. The hunger. It lunged, descent into madness. Mason barely dodged the shadow's grasp, stumbling backward into Sarah. Ruth screamed, dropping the journal, which scattered its fragile pages into the swirling chaos. The hunger's roar filled the cavern, a sound of despair and rage. It reached for Mason, tendrils snaking toward his chest. A flash of light burst from the bracelet, blinding and pure. The hunger recoiled, howling in fury. Kara stepped forward, her spectral hand outstretched. "Stop," she whispered, voice trembling. The hunger froze, its red eyes narrowing. Mason looked into Kara's eyes and saw a flicker of something. Hope, fear, love. The choice. Kara's voice echoed in Mason's mind. The hunger feeds on fear, on silence, but it can be starved if the town remembers, if the stories are told. The cavern trembled. Elias's voice faltered. "You must choose," Ruth said, tears streaming. "Bind the hunger forever, or let the town remember and risk its return." Mason's heart pounded. Could they end this? Or was the darkness an eternal curse? The binding. Mason reached for the scattered pages, his fingers trembling as he reassembled the ritual's final words. Sarah and Ruth formed a circle, chanting softly, their voices weaving a fragile barrier against the darkness. The hunger writhed, shrieking, but the light from the bracelet grew stronger, filling the chamber with a golden glow. Slowly, the shadow receded, drawn back into the abyss. Kara and the other children smiled faintly, free, but fading. "Remember us," Kara whispered, "so we are never hungry again." Aftermath. Mason staggered out of the tunnels, the first light of dawn warming his face. The weight of the night lingered, but so did a fragile hope. Whispering Pines would never forget, but the scars beneath the earth remained, waiting. Whispering Pines, June 14th, 2024, before dawn. The rain had stopped, but a dense, spectral mist hung over Whispering Pines, as if the very breath of the town had slowed, hesitated. Its streets, usually silent this early, held an eerie anticipation, an electric stillness in the trees, the houses, even the air itself. Mason stood at the mouth of the tunnel, lantern in one hand, Kara's bracelet in the other. The iron grate sealing the entrance to the ritual chamber remained closed behind him, at least for now. The hunger had been pushed back, but not destroyed. It waited, and Mason could feel it, inside his bones, in the vibrations under his feet, in the echoing sound of a bell that hadn't rung in decades. He turned back once, half expecting to see Kara. Just a glimpse, just her eyes in the fog. But there was only shadow and the faint glint of morning behind clouds. 7:42 a.m., Whispering Pines Memorial Hall. Word had spread, not in headlines, not in public broadcasts, but in whispers past house to house, neighbor to neighbor, like a myth just barely remembered. By mid-morning, over 60 people had gathered in the old town hall. No announcements had been made, no flyers, no press releases. And yet they came. Some were old residents who remembered the summer of 1989 with silence and grief. Others were younger, curious, skeptical, or simply drawn to the uneasy pull that gripped the entire town. At the front stood Mason, his hands trembling as he placed the bracelet and Eliza Carroway's journal on a worn wooden table. To his left, Ruth sat quietly, scanning the crowd with cautious hope. Sarah stood beside her, arms crossed, alert. And in the back, leaning against a wooden beam like a ghost from another era, was Elias. He hadn't spoken since the ritual. He didn't need to. Mason stepped forward, clearing his throat. The room quieted. He spoke plainly, with no performance in his voice, just the weight of a man carrying a truth the town had denied for 35 years. There were 4 children who vanished in 1989, he began. Kara, Dylan, Grace, Matthew. Most of you knew them, played with them, went to school with them. Some of you were the last to see them ride down Pine Street. Murmurs, nods, eyes flicking to the floor. They didn't run away. They weren't kidnapped by someone passing through. They were taken by the town itself. A silence fell, deep and immediate. They followed something down into the old tunnels. Something they heard, something they thought was calling them. A bell, a voice, a secret buried beneath whispering pines for generations. He opened Eliza's journal, flipping to a marked page. These tunnels were built long before the town was settled. They weren't mines. They weren't escape routes. They were cages, a containment, for something we didn't understand. He paused, voice thickening. And when we forgot those who disappeared, when we chose silence over remembrance, that thing grew stronger. 10:15 a.m., Ruth's house. While Mason spoke, Ruth's hands worked over aged blueprints of the town's original layout, unearthed from her father's long-sealed archive. She traced a red pen across a section labeled South Foundation, unstable. Beneath it, Chamber B3, unauthorized, sealed. Her fingers trembled. It was directly beneath St. Gideon's Church. She circled it. 11:30 a.m., Town Square. A temporary memorial had been set up where the old merry-go-round once stood. Flowers, candles, photographs. At the center, a framed image of the Pine Street Four, arms over each other's shoulders, smiling with scraped knees and wind-burned cheeks. A soft breeze stirred the paper edges. From across the square, a slow group began to form, led by Mason, Sarah, and Ruth. Behind them walked townsfolk, many quiet, some in tears. A few held photographs of other missing children, ones whose names had never made the newspapers. A candlelight vigil was scheduled for sunset, 3:42 p.m., St. Gideon's Church. Ruth unlocked the heavy front doors, her flashlight trembling as she stepped inside. Dust floated in sunbeams that cut across the nave like the blades of an old memory. The altar was simple. Beneath it, a trapdoor, unknown to the current pastor, abandoned since the 1930s. Ruth dropped to her knees, pried open the rusted handle, and revealed a narrow, vertical shaft descending into darkness. She took one breath and descended. The walls were narrow, claustrophobic. Wet. At the bottom, a sealed wooden door, covered in carvings, scratched spirals, repeated names, and a phrase scrawled over and over. We fed it. Now it feeds. Behind the door, the hum of something, not dead, not alive, waiting. 5:01 p.m., the mayor's office. Mayor Elaine Hart sat across from Mason, pale and wordless. He slid a copy of Eliza's final journal entry across her desk. I know you didn't start this, he said quietly, but you've kept it buried. It ends today. Her voice cracked. Do you know what happens if people believe you? The lawsuits? The exhumations? The property values? Mason met her eyes. What happens if they don't? She didn't answer. 6:58 p.m., Town Square Memorial Vigil. Hundreds had gathered now. Candles flickered in trembling hands. Wind rustled trees. Children stood beside their parents, holding flowers. A soft chime echoed across the square. Everyone turned. From the edge of the woods, a single bicycle bell dangled from a tree branch, old, rusted, swaying gently in the breeze. It rang again, then again, 3 times. Mason stepped forward and held up Kara's bracelet. "The bell will always ring," he said, voice low but unwavering. "But so long as we remember, it will never be answered." Later that night, the tunnel below Main Street. Sarah and Ruth stood guard as Mason and Elias returned to the old ritual chamber, now resealed. The iron grate was cold to the touch. Mason placed the bracelet atop the stone altar, a final offering, a closing of the loop. From the darkness beyond, a faint voice echoed, barely audible, like the sigh of someone finally exhaling after holding their breath for a century. "Thank you." Whispering Pines, June 15th, 2024. The fog had lifted. Sunlight poured through cracks in the old oak canopy. Birdsong returned to the woods. Construction tape was placed around the old tunnel entrances. Historical plaques were ordered. The Pine Street Four became part of the school curriculum. Mason walked the street near the elementary school. A little girl on a bicycle rang her bell as she passed him. He flinched, then smiled. Not everything that echoes is a warning. Sometimes it's just a memory. Epilogue, a town that remembers. There are towns built on steel, on oil, on fortune. And then there are towns like Whispering Pines, built on secrets. But secrets rot when buried too deep, and eventually they claw their way out. The hunger beneath Whispering Pines was never truly defeated. You cannot kill a thing born from silence, fed by denial, but it was seen, spoken, bound by memory, by names carved into stone, by the voices of those who refuse to forget. Each time a bell rings now, someone remembers the children, not just the Pine Street Four, but the others too. And the hunger, still deep, still cold, must wait, because as long as there is light and names and truth, it starves.